Welcome to another Unit Dreaming episode where we have Jeanette Shorey on today. Jeanette Shorey is a national board certified music teacher with over 2 decades of experience teaching general music, choir, orff ensembles, and group guitar. Jeanette is an arts integration specialist, an instructional coach, a national presenter, and a mentor. She has studied arts integration at the Kennedy Center through their CETA program and has completed orff levels 1 and 2. She has presented at MEAs all over the country and mentors music teachers through the Happy Music Teacher Academy. Jeanette is the author of resource books, Stories That Sing and Stories That Sing Too. I am so excited for you to hear from Jeanette in our Unit Dreaming episode today. Let's get to it. I'm educational justice coach Lindsay Lyons, and here on the Time for Teachership podcast, we learn how to inspire educational innovation for racial and gender justice, design curricula grounded in student voice, and build capacity for shared leadership. I'm a former teacher leader turned instructional coach. I'm striving to live a life full of learning, running, baking, traveling, and parenting because we can be rockstar educators and be full human beings. If you're a principal, assistant superintendent, curriculum director, instructional coach, or teacher who enjoys nerding out about co-creating curriculum with students, I made this show for you. Here we go. Jeanette, welcome to the Time for Teachership podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I am so excited too, because this is going to be so fun. We're going to merge curriculum building and music and our two passion areas. So this is going to be really nice.
Excellent. Yes, this is totally where my zone of genius. So I'm really excited about it too.
Yay. Awesome. Okay. So do you want to share kind of the impetus or the context for something that you're thinking about, or just share kind of the setting in which, or the grade band in which you taught, and then we can kind of come up with a spark for the unit we're going to create today. I know, for example, in your podcast, we talked a little bit about ways to design and structure units that might not be around, for example, holidays, which might be a traditional way you would structure a unit, but instead around other more deeper things that you wanted to capture, and then pulling in a bunch of genres of music around that deeper core concept or thing that we want to capture.
Sure. So one of the things I've been thinking about right now is because I'm designing some lesson plans for music teachers to develop classroom culture. And one of the things that I love to do is I have this one storybook that I almost always started with, and it was called All Are Welcome. And I sort of designed my curriculum for the first 8 weeks around building classroom culture and accepting people's differences. And in the process of that, in the process of that, I would pull in just different genres of music from different areas, because, when children hear music that they're not traditionally used to hearing, they automatically start giggling. And it's like this nervous giggle, what am I listening to? So I find that it's really important from the get-go to start getting them to hear different styles of music, different genres of music, different music from different places in the world, so that they're used to hearing those sorts of things and they get beyond that nervousness about, oh my gosh, this sounds so weird to my ears. And they're really used to hearing all kinds of different music. So, and I think in today's in today's society, it feels like music is so homogenous. There's so many different genres out there, and our children are not listening to them. And I just think it's important for them to hear. It's important for acceptance. It's a stepping stone for getting children to accept different styles of music, getting them to accept the differences in each other, the differences in culture, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that actually connects to my next question, which is what you would want students to be able to kind of pursue. And I say pursue specifically because I'm referencing Dr. Goldie Muhammad's framework. And she talks about 3 things that I love, which are identity, criticality, and joy. And so specifically, I am thinking that the identity piece that you just spoke about, the thing you just spoke about reminds me of identity and how she talks about it. So she says how is this going to help students both learn about themselves, like their own identities, but also someone else's identity that's not their own. And so I think there's something there. I also think it's helpful for the criticality piece. So what she defines as criticality is like, really, how is the lesson or the unit in our case engaging students thinking about power, about equity, about disrupting any sort of oppression that we see. So we're not just like noticing that things are bad, but like, what do we do to, like you're saying, kind of create that class culture that is beyond that, right? That remedies that potential oppression, or like the giggling that might be harmful, or, whatever. And then also joy, which I think music is such well connected to joy, right? Like, so thinking about identity, criticality, and joy in those ways, what comes to mind as you're thinking about like a class culture? Maybe this is like a start of the year unit we're thinking.
Yes. This would be first 8 weeks of school.
Okay, great. Thank you for giving us a boundary too. I love thinking about how often do you see your students? Would this be weekly? I saw my students once a week for 45 minutes. But most music teachers traditionally see their students once a week for 30 minutes, or sometimes they're on a rotating schedule of like every 6 days, every 8 days, that sort of thing. Okay. So roughly we could estimate about once a week, maybe conservatively like 30 minutes if we were. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that would probably work. And so as you're thinking about these 8 weeks, and the goal of kind of building that class culture, that goal of appreciating and valuing all different types of music, and that all are welcome kind of grounding. What comes to mind when you think about identity, criticality, and joy, when you're thinking, okay, at the end of this unit, I want students to make sure that, they hit these things, or they pursue these things over the course of these 8 classes? Okay, so when you say identity, I just want to clarify a little bit. Are we talking about the personal identity of the student, or am I misunderstanding? That's a great question. I see identity as like a bunch of things. So I see it as like personal, and then we have multiple axes of identity. A lot of times when people think about identity, they think about kind of like one thing, for example, like just a person's race, or just a person's gender, or just a person's language. And it's like all the intersecting aspects of that. So there's like the personal way that all of my axes of identity intersect, but then there's also the fact that I am connected to a group that also holds those identities. So I think it's kind of like both the personal and the group kind of connections that are part of that. I don't know if that helps to answer it, but I see identity in a lot of ways: linguistic, nationality, race, gender, class. It could be ability, like, so we're looking at like neurodiverse composers or something like that. I mean, it could be a range of things. I'll stop there. So I think identity wise, I want there to be the identity of the student as a whole person, their, how they see themselves, working with their class. And especially because they're going to be composing and creating music together, I want them to feel confident in their identity as a creator. And it's really tricky, because, in our elementary realm, well, really in school in general, we tend to give our students a lot of, cookie cutter, I don't know how to say it because that doesn't sound right, but we don't give them I don't think they have a lot of time to be creative. And then they get into the music classroom and they're like, you want me to do what? So it's like, so they need to feel that confidence in themselves, not only as a creator, but the confidence that they're working in a safe space where everyone around them is also working as a creator, and they feel comfortable sharing ideas, and they feel comfortable that no one's going to laugh at them, and no one's going to think their ideas are bad or silly or anything else. If that makes sense. That makes total sense to me. I definitely think, right, sometimes things aren't always like purely comfortable, but we certainly can, like when we're creating and trying something new, but I definitely think we can have the kind of assurance or the confidence or the comfort in knowing that we are not going to be picked on for sharing our ideas, right? I think that's beautifully put, that no one will laugh at me, right? That's exactly what we want. Awesome. And I think part of that too, in speaking to the multitude of identities and the different genres of music and how that connects to identity, definitely comes in supporting each individual student as a creator, especially if they hold an identity or are affiliated with a group of people who are not typically held up as like brilliant composers, or this genre of music is super important. And, I think that kind of ties to that criticality piece as well. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to speak to on the criticality or joy side, if anything else was sticking out for you.
So I think if I understand the criticality portion of it, I think that it would be important for the class. Every class I see is a different personality, like literally, and this happens every year, that part of the personality is formed by the teacher that they're working with, the classroom teacher they're working with, but also they have their own unique personality. And as they start working together, that's one of the really cool things about teaching all students and teaching all classes is, they have this identity within themselves, but they also have this, like the way that they work together, and not all students work well together. So, depending on the class, sometimes it's going to be more difficult for me as the teacher, as the leader of, the creativity, to kind of, I really have to change up the way I do things depending on the class. And as I get more involved and the year goes on, I really get a sense of that class's personality. But also in the beginning of the year, you're kind of waiting in blind, because even if you know the students really well, you don't know them together as a unit. So I think it's important to, think critically about what the students are presenting to you and what they're, how do I say this? What they're responding to, because every class is going to respond in a different way to what you have to say, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And it makes me think about the idea of nervous giggling and like, how we address that. And maybe each class gets that addressed differently, but the ability to unpack, or I'm thinking, again, at the end of the unit, what are students getting out of this? Like that idea that like there is a reason we're giggling because there's some sort of dynamic at play. And underneath that, and I mean, again, depending on their age, you're going to address this in different words, but it probably is still a relevant thing to address. But like that idea of there is some sort of power dynamic happening, right? So like you are in a space where you hear as a child whatever music is around you, and that is normalized. And then what is not normalized? And then now why are we laughing? Because it's uncomfortable, right? And so there's kind of that dynamic of power that Dr. Muhammad talks about in criticality, is like addressing that power and then disrupting that like uneven power that is there by normalizing all of the music. So I think that's brilliant to be able to think about. And then I also love that you're bringing to the table this idea of just like the idea of the class as a whole operating kind of in their own identity, and ways that power and equity kind of show up in different ways, and how we would address that for the different group dynamics kind of shifts for each class. And because you have so many classes versus, an elementary teacher, for example, who has one, like in a core content area, that really is an important consideration. So I appreciate you naming that. I didn't even think about that.
Absolutely. And then as far as joy, my goal as an elementary school music teacher was always that my students found joy in what we were doing. And if it looked to me like it was a struggle for them and they weren't enjoying it and they weren't getting anything out of it, then I was going to revamp so that they did find joy, because my goal was that they left my classroom and they were like, that was my most fun class all week. That's where I want to come back to. And then, when they go on to middle school, they're going to be like, yes, I'm definitely doing music. I can't decide band or choir, but I'm definitely doing music because it was always so much fun, and to make things easy for the students. And I don't mean that I'm not challenging them, but I would try to find a way to make things easy for them and fun for them so that they were learning, but it wasn't a struggle. Like whatever they were learning was not a struggle for them. And again, that goes back to every class has a different personality, and every class has to sort of, you really have to work with the individual classes and go, well, for this class, I know that this lesson plan is not going to work, but for this, and I may have to, water it down a little bit, or I may have to make it a little bit more intricate depending on the personality of the class.
I love that. And I love thinking about, how do we like keep the challenge, but make it easy so that it's not the struggle. And I love the takeaway of like, that was my most fun class all week. I just think if every student said that about every class, that would be so great.
I know. Wouldn't it be amazing if they came home from school and they were like, my day was awesome.
Right? Like I can't even begin to describe how cool it was.
Right.
So, okay, this is beautiful. I'm loving where this is going. So the next thing I want to do is think about a project question. So a project question is what I used to call a driving question. And really this is kind of like thinking about the culminating activity. So if students are going to be creators, for example, I'm hearing like that there might be some creation happening. Like, what is the thing? And this is kind of paired with the next question, but what's the thing that this unit will culminate in? Like, what's the big kind of application activity where students are kind of taking what they learn and doing something very creative with it? Mm-hmm. And what will house that project? And the question that students will want to be thinking through each lesson, and what we'll want to be thinking through as we plan each lesson, is really what that project question is. So examples of project questions that I've seen are like, kind of like, might be like, what's the best formula for a fun music class, or something, like where students get to like say like, well, it's a little bit of hearing a different kind of music, and it's a little bit of me getting to create or play around with the music, or, or it could be like, is this type of music X or Y, and like having some sort of concept that you're teaching them, and they get to categorize like, okay, this type of music is placed in this category. So I think a lot about like the formula for, or does this music or this piece do X or Y? What would it look like if is another, like, let's envision, there's an example of someone who came on my podcast earlier that was talking about how in response to a current event, students created a piece, a musical composition, and they actually sent it to the families of children. And this was a Parkland shooting. And they sent it to the families, and the families were like, took comfort, I suppose, or something, like found it so helpful or so poignant that the students had created the piece in response, that they like wrote back to them. And so, for example, like something that would be like a project question for that unit might be something like, what is the best thing we can do in the wake of X, event or something. So that was just a lot of rambling on my part. Anything that comes to mind in terms of the start of a project question? I don't think you have to have it fully fleshed out.
So I like the idea of what would it look like if, and you tell me if I'm on the right track, because I'm not 100% sure, but what would it look like if I worked with the students in my classroom to create a piece of music, or let me think about this. What would it look like if I worked with the students in my classroom and we each used our strengths and our differences to create a piece of music, or to create a composition that expresses our differences, a composition that expresses our strengths, because the whole idea of those first 8 weeks of school is to acknowledge each other's differences, to acknowledge each other's strengths, to acknowledge each other's, like, what do you bring to the table as a student in this class? And how is that different? And how can we use your strengths, and how can we use those differences to create a wonderful piece of music?
I love this. Okay. So I think that what you have for now, it to me is a very teacher facing question in the sense of like, what would it look like if I created with my students? And like, you're kind of thinking through all the things that you want students to kind of pull out during the unit, which I think is perfect for like a planning lens. What I'm thinking for a student facing project question might be even more succinct. It could be like, what would it look like if we created a piece of music that showed how awesome we were or something, you know what I mean? And then it was like, well,
I like that.
yeah, right. Like, then it would be like you pulling out from them. Well, our differences make us awesome and our strengths make us awesome. And each of you bring something to the table. What is that? Okay. So then how does that go into this piece of music? So that kind of idea that there's like a back end teacher question that's like, here's the things I'm going to pull out from them or make sure I'm like tying to in each lesson. And then there's the student facing, often in very student friendly terms that are maybe more simplified. But yeah, what do you think for the student facing one?
I love what you just said. I love what you just said. And
I'm trying to remember.
Either awesome or fabulous. I kind of
Ooh,
fabulous too.
I love fabulous. Okay. So what would it look like if we created, and so there's the collaboration, I think, inherent in like we created, right, as a class, piece of music or composition? What's your preference?
If we're talking about students, if we created music, just say if we created music.
That's what was the next piece?
That shows how fabulous we are.
Oh, I love it. Okay. What would it look like if we created music that shows how fabulous we are? So good. And I'm just imagining too, the value of having so many classes here is that you could then have like a whole album because there's so many classes where they're each creating so much.
Yes.
Ooh, cool. Okay. So then the project itself, I like to think of this in terms of publishing format. Like, where does it go once it's created? So if students are creating, for example, a piece of music, then like, how do family members or how do other school stakeholders or maybe the local community, like how do people hear it? Like where is there like either a concert or are you creating, you know, like a playlist on Spotify or something, you know, like how does it go out? And then also what are the kind of various formats that you're envisioning for this unit? Is there a particular type of instrument or something that you're thinking, here's kind of the container for what this could look like? Or could students choose like any type of music, any genre of music, any instrument that they want to use?
I think it would need to be for ease of organization for the teacher. I think it would need to be, for example, non-pitched percussion instruments, so or ORF instruments. So I would think you would want to choose one type of instrument, or ukuleles, or guitars, or whatever it is that you have in your classroom that you really love to teach. That would be, for me, I love to start with non-pitched percussion instruments in the beginning of the year. It gives me a chance to, you know, kind of review them and all that sort of thing. And the kids love to play them. So for me, I would probably choose non-pitched percussion instruments.
Awesome. Okay. I love it. And then in terms of publishing, how do you want people to experience or get this music?
I would want them to see the video of the final product, and that would be probably our private YouTube channel.
I love that. Okay. Super cool.
That way they can see and they can hear, because I think there's value in being able to see children perform music, and, you know, just the excitement when they're creating something that they're excited about and they're playing something that they're excited about. It is like, you can just feel it when in the expressions on their faces, and, you know, it's different than just listening to it.
Oh, I love that. That's so true. That is so true. So as we start to think about, okay, this is 8 weeks. So we're talking maybe 8 lessons. I usually think about kind of 3 phases that I like to build out. And then I like to also have some like work time for students to actually like be working on this actively, maybe for a full lesson or 2. And then also an opportunity for students to kind of test out maybe their ideas or share with a peer and get some feedback on it before it's like presentation ready or YouTube video ready. And so the first 3 that I like to think about are kind of like the hook. Like, how do we get students to just engage in this conversation from the beginning? And I know you often use storybooks. And so maybe that's like the storybook lesson. And then build the base, which is like, what are the core ideas. So it might be core content ideas in terms of inclusivity and celebration of difference or something like that. But it also might be a musical, right? A musical concept that we're working on throughout the unit or something. What's that kind of like core thing? And then from there, I like to look at case studies. So I don't know, you are the music expert, so I don't know if this will make any sense, but I'm thinking like, okay, so let's say there's kind of a build the base that's like a core musical concept. And then we look at case studies of where this musical concept lies in this genre of music or this genre of music or this genre of music. And so each day is kind of like a dip into a different genre or a different type of music in some way, but it all kind of ties back to whatever that core music concept is. I don't know if that would work or if that's typically how you would plan your lessons.
So the hook would definitely be a storybook. There's a couple that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. One is All Are Welcome Here by Alexandra Penfold. And that is set in a classroom on the first day of school, and the parents are there and the students are there, and the students are literally, they all look different. They all, there's one little boy in a wheelchair. There's one little girl who's blind. That's the wrong word, visually impaired. And, so, and it's all about how while they eat differently, they live in different places, et cetera, everyone's welcome. So I love that book. That's usually my second lesson of the school year is that book. And then we do some musical elements to it. But if I was designing something like this, that would be my starting point. And so that one, and then there's another one called Your Name is a Song. And that is by Jamila Tompkins Bigelow, I think. And that one is all about a little girl who goes to school for the first day, and she says her name gets stuck in her teacher's mouth. And her mother is like, well, tell your teacher that your name is a song. And so I think that names are so important to children, to everybody. And sometimes people are very accepting of, okay, well, you can just call me, Maylin or Mylene or, whatever. But to me, I'm always like, I want to pronounce your name the way your mom or your grandmother or, your loved ones pronounce your name. So, I think there's a lot of power in names. So those would be two possible starting points. And they really would take us in different directions, but depending on what we chose.
I love that. I think about this probably won't work for a music class. Maybe it will. I don't know. But I always do story of my name as one of the first like week of school kind of activities where we literally sit in a circle and every student gets to hold the talking piece and just literally share anything they want about who gave them their name, what their name means to them. Do they hate their name? Are they named after someone? Anything regarding their name, because there's no prior knowledge required, right? And every student has a story to share. And so I'm wondering if there's even something with that I'm sure you already have a lesson in mind of like what you would do after reading that storybook. But, this idea of having students maybe incorporate some of that name piece as like in the music itself that they end up creating, or like as kind of a starter activity where they're playing with the music that best represents their name or something.
Yeah. So one thing that I love to do is I love to go around and have them, say their name and we echo back their name. But I love the idea of they say their name and then maybe just a little bit about their story of their name. So, and we could go around the circle like that. And then I could have them, do it in rhythm. So for example, I can't think of a good example, but I'm Jeanette. My name is French. I don't know, something like that. So, you would start it with just like, tell us one or two sentences about your name, the story of your name, and then now make it into one measure sentence, one measure sentence, and do some rhythm with it. So
I love this. So good. Okay. So then what would your build the base be in terms of a core concept, either musically related or related to the kind of ideas that you want to teach?
Tell me again about build the base.
Yeah. So this is like, I like to think of it as like if students learned one thing from the entire unit, like what would it be? And given that it is a music class, like I think ultimately we want students to learn about like the idea of all are welcome, right? And this idea of class culture. But I imagine there's also some music stuff that you do in a unit like this, or right. So if there was like one musical concept that you're like, okay, let's say I only have like 4 units for the whole year or something, right? This is one of the 4 things that I want students leaving the year absolutely knowing. They have to know it. It is present in a bunch of musical genres, like they, whatever it is. And so the build the base is like the one, maybe 2 lessons of this core idea. So I am super like my chorus teacher, my piano teacher would be really ashamed of me, but like this idea of like, I don't know, maybe like the whatever that is, like the 4 beat, like the quarter notes or something, right? Like something like really basic that students would be able to kind of pick up in different genres, because then what we do after the build the base is like, okay, now where does that concept appear in different types of music? So I don't know if there's a particular musical concept that you would teach early on in the year, or that would go with the idea of like a lot of different genres.
So one of the things that I like to do a lot is I like to have students build rhythms. And so maybe a 4-measure rhythm, like if I gave them any concept, they would be able to create a 4-measure rhythm with lyrics, and they would be able to play it on, we don't want to say any instrument in the classroom, but on any one of 4 different instruments in the classroom. So
I love
like they could
this.
choose the 4 instruments that they knew how to play, because they forget, they're only with us once a week. So, for me to say every instrument wouldn't work, but probably any student could pick up 4 different instruments and know how to play them.
Awesome. Oh, I love this idea because there's so much you could do with it, right? Once you have the 4 measure rhythm, like create for any concept, like anything. So you could do, just to preview like our Emily session, right? Like the idea of like taking a current event and adding song to it or something. And as a response, as an emotional response to something happening in the world, like there's so many things that you could do. And then I'm wondering, okay, so for case studies, now how we take that and actually like bring it to life. One thing I was thinking was like genres. So we could do genres, or we could do like nations, or something like that. But I'm also wondering if we would want to, yes, do those things, but maybe have something else that centers or becomes like the case for each of those days. And so what I'm thinking here is like, your students' response to like core values or experiences of life. Like maybe students are kind of co-creating what the case study topics are. Like I'm just thinking about this idea of identity and criticality and joy, right? Like maybe those are even the case studies. Like what is like, you're creating a 4-measure rhythm for your identity. You're creating a 4-measure rhythm for what it means to like hear someone be offensive or interrupts that someone being offensive, or, what does it mean to be joyful? Create a 4-measure rhythm about that. Like, I don't know if that's resonating, but I'm just thinking about all the possibilities here of how you could organize those case studies. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, all of those sound amazing. I would say one of the things that comes to mind right away is create a 4-measure rhythm on how it feels when someone disrespects you, and then or create a 4-measure rhythm on how you react in a positive way when someone disrespects you. How you react, or how it feels when someone is doesn't understand your differences, doesn't understand you as a person. I don't know, I'm just like throwing out ideas here.
I love this. Yes. Okay. So we got how it feels when someone disrespects you, how you react when someone disrespects you, and how you react when someone doesn't appreciate your differences. Awesome. I'm wondering about, because these are kind of, I think, centered on the criticality domain of like identity, criticality, joy. Are there some that could be focused on like the name. I mean, we could even do that. You could even do that in like the hook, one of the hook lessons where you are doing your name, like create a 4-measure rhythm for your name, but you haven't quite introduced it yet because build the bass comes after. But I'm wondering if there's an identity one that we could do, and then a joy one, something related to joy.
So an identity one, I mean, it could be as simple as design your name.
Hi, it's Lindsay, just popping in here to tell you about today's episode freebie. Jeanette is sharing her lesson plan sampler. This link will give listeners the lesson plan for All Are Welcome, the storybook, along with another storybook lesson and a fun outdoor music activity. To grab that, go to lindsaybethlyons.com/blog/134. Back to the episode. What do you want us to call you and why? Okay, cool. And then for joy, what would be a prompt for creating a 4-measure rhythm related to joy?
When you feel happy, what does it look like? What is the one thing that comes to mind that makes you happiest? If we want to tie it into music, what kind of music do you listen to that makes you feel happiest?
I love these. Okay, super cool. So I'm wondering, so I have 7. I think you could maybe combine them to, maybe there's like some that would go, into the same lesson, but I'm wondering if you chunked them even like, so we have maybe like 2 lessons for like the hook, maybe like 1 per storybook. Are you thinking storybook lesson, circle about their name? Would that be 3 lessons?
Usually when I do this kind of a thing, I would do storybook and then lesson, and the lesson would center around the storybook. And then I would go into the next storybook and a lesson for that.
All right. So the hook would probably be 2 lessons, like 2 kind of books. Yep. Yeah. And then build the bass. Would you teach a 4-measure rhythm in 1 lesson?
Depends on the grade level. If I'm talking 2nd grade, I probably wouldn't do this kind of activity lower than 2nd grade, but if I'm talking 2nd grade, we probably wouldn't do a 4-measure rhythm. We do a 1-measure rhythm, and we wouldn't call it a measure because they're not a lot of times they're not at that concept yet. Depends on the school, but so I would say the bass would be kind of a progression, and maybe we would start it with like my 5th graders, my 4th graders, they're going to know that right away. Create a 4-measure rhythm, bam, they're going to be fine with that. 2nd and 3rd grade, we probably would have to work together. I'd have to do some modeling, that sort of thing.
Okay. So if we said like on average, maybe it was 1 lesson, then it would be like maybe a little bit more for some, maybe a little bit less for others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, cool. And so then we have 5 left. So we could do maybe like 3 for case studies, and then have 2 for students to just like either create something new, or I'm imagining if they're creating during the case studies, maybe it's just their recording time. Like they already created it, but they're just putting it into YouTube or whatever.
That would be, I think that would work best, is to have 3 that way. And then how many lessons do we have? We've got 3, 4, 5, 6.
I think we thought about 8 initially, and now we're up to 6. Yeah. So we would have 2 left for the
I would say 2 for recording time, for like rehearsal time and recording time. And of course, when you're doing this whole thing, you would want to be really careful to give them a time limit, because I know for probably all teachers, if you don't give them a time limit, like, okay, we're going to set the timer and you've got 3 minutes to come up with your 4-measure rhythm, that type of thing. Because otherwise they're going to spend the whole class on it. And I learned the hard way.
Absolutely. And so I think this is a beautiful like outline for a unit, Jeanette. I'm so excited. How are you feeling? Like, how did this process feel? How are you feeling about the unit in general?
I'm really liking it. It's, first of all, great to talk through something like this with someone. And that's one of the things that I really want to have in my community, the Happy Music Teacher Academy, is the ability for music teachers to meet up together and do something like this, because, you know, there's a music teacher out there who calls us on Music Teacher Island, and that is a true fact. And so, you know, you're trying to come up with wonderful creative lessons for your students, and it's really hard because it's just you. So just to like be able to bounce the ideas off of you, and you give me suggestions and vice versa, it's like the most amazing process ever.
Oh my gosh, that's so heartening to hear. Thank you. And I think that's a perfect segue for you to tell people about all of the things that you do, and the space for any music teachers listening to be able to go find you online, and like, how do they do that, I guess?
Yeah. So I run a community for music teachers. It's called the Happy Music Teacher Academy. And you can go in there and, first of all, have professional development. I have a couple of courses that teach you how to use storybooks in your classroom and to use them to teach music skills, that sort of thing. I also have a course that tells you, kind of teaches you the music teacher lingo, if you will, so that the connection is really very vivid between the classroom and the music room. And it really just adds a whole level of just another level of I can't think of the word. Like a level of respect among the students, because when they hear that you're using the same lingo, it's really good for them, and it also shows them that connection. So there are 2 courses in there, a couple more courses on the way, and then the biggest drive for the Music Teacher Academy is that I want there to be a community among music teachers, and we just really don't have that ability, especially in the elementary realm. So where can you find me? My website is storiesthatsing.net. And you can, if you wanted to see a little bit about what I do as far as developing lesson plans, storiesthatsing.net/lesson plan sampler. And if you wanted to hear more about the Music Teacher, Happy Music Teacher Academy, it's storiesthatsing.net/join the Happy Music Teacher Academy.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Jeanette. Also, Jeanette has an awesome podcast. I don't know if you want to talk about that, Jeanette.
Oh, yes, I do. I have a podcast. I meant to mention that. It's called The Happy Music Teacher. And I dramatically changed the way that I was teaching, and just kind of my whole drive and my whole purpose as a music teacher about maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I sort of just reset my mind and just, I just really approached things from a very different perspective. And I found that I was a lot happier in my job after that. And I was a lot happier as a teacher. And my students, I saw a lot more smiling faces, and I saw a lot more engagement and interactivity. And so I just have been thinking for a long time about ways to help other music teachers be happier in their jobs, because it is a hard job. And, you know, I think a lot of times people don't realize, because they're like, oh, they're just in there singing and dancing and it's so much fun. And yes, it's so much fun. But if you are an elementary music teacher or a music teacher of any kind, you know that it is also a hard job. So my goal is to just give you tips and suggestions and help you to kind of wade through all of the garbage that comes along with your job. So if you'd like to check that out on any podcast format, it's The Happy Music Teacher.
Awesome. Jeanette, thank you so much for spending time with us today and for doing this kind of episode. I know it's a little daunting to kind of just jump in there, and you created something beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I thank you for having me. I really thoroughly enjoyed this process.
Yay. Oh, I'm so glad. If you're leaving this episode wanting more, you're going to love my live coaching intensive curriculum bootcamp. I help one department or grade team create feminist, anti-racist curricula that challenges, affirms, and inspires all students. We weave current events into course content and amplify student voices, which skyrockets engagement and academic achievement. It energizes educators feeling burnt out, and it's just 2 days. Plus, you can reuse the same process anytime you create a new unit, which saves time and money.
If you can't wait to bring this to your staff, I'm inviting you to sign up for a 20-minute call with me. Grab a spot on my calendar at www.lindsaybethlyons.com/contact. Until next time, leaders, continue to think big, act brave, and be your best self.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.